Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name's Holden, and I work with wood. And I promise I'm actually gonna do it this time. So in the last video, we pretty much moved the living area of the basement over to one side so that I could actually have room to set up my shop. With that, we set up the curtain over here so that any dust that's accumulated while I'm working won't get over to this side of the basement. We also set up the air filtration system, which will protect my lungs as I'm working with wood. And then finally, we unboxed the table saw, which is going to be the main thing that I'm going to be woodworking with. So that was pretty exciting. But today, we're going to be doing part 2 of setting up the shop, which is going to be tackling this monstrosity of a workbench. So this workbench was already actually here when I moved in with my girlfriend and my best friend. And initially, I didn't think it was going to be much use. At the bottom, you can actually see that it's been rotted away. And so my goal today is going to be pretty much renovating this workbench and making it actually usable as a miter station. Speaking of, time to go unbox the miter saw. The miter saw is one of those critical tools in the workshop, pretty much on the same level as a table saw. I got this one for Christmas from my family, and it's one of the best Christmas presents I've ever gotten. But the tool itself is actually pretty heavy, so I had to enlist the help of my friend Zane. It actually came with a decent manual. In fact, it was the perfect size to put my tablet on so I could YouTube how to set it up. So let's talk about this saw. It's from AlexGrohl, which is a Harbor Freight brand, and I know there's stigmas about Harbor Freight, but it's still a great miter saw and perfect for beginners once you calibrate it. This is a sliding miter saw, which means that the blade can reach further out, giving it a 14-inch cut capacity. The blade itself is 12 inches, and it's also dual bevel, which means that I can make even more angle adjustments. But that's not all. I actually have one more thing to unpack. The dust right separator. This is going to be a vital part of air filtration. In the last video I installed this filter on the ceiling, but that's really only the second half of the process. The way it works is that you can typically hook vacuums up to most shop tools to pull the initial wood chunks that are sprayed out. But this can really clog the vacuum. That's where this device comes in. You can hook it up between your vacuum and the tool, and the separator will filter out lots of the wood particles. Alright, so we've gotten that stuff set up, and now I want to focus in on the wood underneath this bench. It's just taking up a lot of space that I want to actually put tools and stuff down here for, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a shelving system on the other side of the shop, and that's where I'm going to store my wood now. But first, time to gear up. I don't even know what these pockets are for. So, with my incredible art skills that even a computer couldn't replicate, I drew some plans. It'll be about 6 feet long with multiple shelves that are all angled back slightly to help prevent the wood from falling off. Since this is going to be the first cut on this saw, I'll explain my process for marking and cutting. Whenever I mark out my wood, I make sure to include an X on the side that's being cut away. This is so I can position the blade on that side of the line. I do this because of kerf. Kerf is the width of the saw blade. When cutting, blades don't make a perfect slice down the middle. So if I cut a 10-foot board in half, I don't actually have 2 5-foot pieces. I actually have 2 boards that are just shy of 5 feet by a 1/16 of an inch. That's because the blade's about 1/8 of an inch wide. So when I position the blade just to the right of the line, I get that perfect cut. Now on to the actual build. I started out by cutting some 2x4s for the ground supports. I decided to connect everything together with pocket holes, so I'm using a Mosca jig that really speeds up the process. Pocket holes essentially drive screws in at an angle, so you have more options to hide the screws in the final product, and it's more stable than just screwing it from the outside. Now it's time for the shelves. I'm cutting them all at an 85-degree angle so that any wood placed on them will lean back and not fall off. I'm just going to be screwing the shelves in normally, so I'm pre-drilling all the holes on the sides. Then I drill the screws in part way to help with assembly later. Alright, it's a new day, and I finished up the wood storage over on that half of the basement. Now I can turn my attention to this pretty much rotting workbench that was already here. The goal is going to be to clean everything off, break it all down, and rebuild it into a miter station for me. After cleaning everything off, I tried to flip the table to deconstruct it that way, but as you can see, it's really unstable, so I just decided to do it right side up. It was at this point that I realized that instead of just throwing the mallet into the bench and throwing out my back, I could just take out the nails first and make my job a lot easier. After breaking everything down, I realized that I only needed to throw away the legs that were rotting. Everything else was actually still pretty good wood, so I just need to take a sander to that to remove the dust and grime. Now that the panels are clean, I'm gonna glue them together with some wood glue. Wood glue is actually stronger than screws, because screws only grip wood in a specific location versus glue which grips the wood across the entire joint. It can even be stronger than the wood itself. After a few days, I came back into the shop to unclamp the tabletop now that it's been glued together, and this thing was really heavy, so I had some difficulties getting it off those parallel clamps there, but I did eventually. After that, I got to work strengthening the supports for the table. Right now, there was just a bunch of nails in them, and I chose to keep them in because it would have been just more work than was really necessary to take them out. I'm just going to put some braces in between the middle with some screws, and that should get it real solid. Then I cut out some legs with some non-rotting wood and screwed them into these ports. In order to prevent the bench legs from rotting like the last ones did, I'm going to install some leg levelers to lift it off the floor a little bit. And in fact, I think I'm probably going to install levelers on almost all things that I build in the future, just because it almost never happens to where you have a perfectly flat floor. Alright, so I finished making the legs, and the final step now is going to be cutting out some plywood, so it'll be that second shelf down there so I can place all my tools down there. So here's hoping that I don't miscut this plywood, because it feels like wood doesn't grow on trees anymore. So, alright. It took some effort to get the sheet down into the basement, but once I did, I used my circular saw to make the cuts I needed. I could have used the table saw, but the sheet was so big it just would have been too much hassle. Turns out being a woodworker also means having a lot of tools that can do the same job, but it's about picking the most efficient tool for that job. Now it's time to break out the new jigsaw that I got as a gift from my girlfriend's parents. I'll need this because I need to inset the shelf's corners a bit to fit around the legs. And pro tip, make lots of friends and family, not so that you can enjoy their company and support them, but do it so that they'll gift you tools. And that wraps up the lower shelf on the workbench. And now the final step, screwing the tabletop to the legs. This was actually a little harder than I thought. I initially was going to do it upside down, but I realized I didn't want to drill any more pocket holes since I was super lazy at this point. So I did every furniture company's worst nightmare, lifting the top myself. I actually recommend this strategy if you're looking to throw out your back, as it can be very effective. Unfortunately, I got by without doing that this time. With the tabletop on there now, all I had to do was screw it in, so let's see how this build turned out. So that's it. I've built out a miter station from the old workbench that was here. I've moved the wood over into the corner, and now I'm ready to tackle the final part of setting up the shop, which is building a classic workbench. I'll see you guys next time when I work with wood.